Johan Sundberg. He's the coordinator in Science and Society at the Department of Physiology and Pharmacology unit for Bioentrepreneurship. My pronunciation is Karolinska Institute. He is a licensed physician. Is a senior university lecturer at that institution, and he works as an investment manager at the Karolinska Institute Fund. He has received many prizes, some of which were at this institute. Another institute that I can't even come close to pronouncing. The next one at the Research Commission of the European Descartes Communication Prize for Excellence in Science in 2005. He is the Vice President of Euroscience and was the initiator of Euroscience Open Forum, a large international conference on science, technology, business, and communication. Dr. Sundberg has served on numerous company boards, and his bio is just way long and very well accomplished. So, Carl, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I don't know if I need a mic.
Yeah, I got most of them down here.
Okay, I think this might be good. So thank you for that introduction. It's great to be here, and I was inspired by the previous talks in many ways. Jeff, you mentioned this boat which is sailing around the world. As it happens, one of my students was on that boat, a medical student, together with an engineer from Silicon Valley. So, and they got to know each other through a program where we sent students abroad to be embedded in various environments across the world. So they went jointly, and interestingly enough, this Silicon Valley engineer, a young guy, who was a serial inventor since he was like 15, 16, he's now 29, 30, he works through his cousin, who is a gynecologist, on a project in Africa, where they try to improve or make available the endoscopy types of technologies. Endoscopy is when you go into the abdomen or into a joint, are very expensive in general, and the prices are rigged for the US or Europe or Japan. But what they've done is to look at it from a frugal point of view and basically assemble things from the shelf, use an iPhone camera, use existing PCs and stuff, and they have reduced the price for the endoscopy by a factor of 50. And it's interesting because they also made market analysis in India when the book passed. India, I think. So it was interesting to connect that. Well, all in all, as mentioned, I do research. I split my time at this Karolinska Institute between research in physiology, which is my home turf. So what we study is basically how people react to physical activity and how the health benefits that follow physical activity are regulated from a molecular and genetic perspective. So we study fundamental processes in humans, in patients and others, to understand how we can optimize the physical activity we may want to prescribe for a patient. And we have also done some patents on that to be able to predict what specific type might be beneficial for you or for me, so that we don't waste our time, in a sense, because we react very differently. So what we work at is personalized lifestyle medicine, that kind. And we've also done projects globally with Vietnam, for example, and now with Uganda, because the diseases across the world are becoming more and more similar. What we see is a westernization, in a sense, of disease patterns. So before the world, the 60 million deaths that take place every year in the world, the large fraction used to be infections. Still is in many countries, especially in places where people are poor. That was the case in Sweden too. If you go back 150 years, infections killed a lot of people. Now we all seem to get the well-known Western lifestyle types of diseases with cancer, diabetes, obesity, obstructive pulmonary disease, psychiatric disease, and so on. And this levels the field in a sense, or it creates enormous challenges for countries that still suffer from insufficient resources, quite a high fraction of infectious disease, and this double burden of diseases coming along. So what we see in these projects is business opportunities that we see surface in Vietnam, open that in this world. Anyway, there are many things to be mentioned here. I speak from the perspective of a medical university, a large medical university, with about 650 research groups, thousands of medical researchers, 400 PhDs in medicine every year spun out, companies spun out as well. And Sweden is, if you look from the outside of Europe, you might think Europe is in a constant crisis, which it might be in a sense, but Sweden is not in that state. It is growing reasonably well. We increase funding for research, etc., etc. But still, we have complacency when it comes to formation of new businesses, in the sense that people might feel too much of security, and also the governmental policies are not in the optimal state, even though they're not so bad in general. So I, together with many others, advocate a lot of changes in the system. So I think another important aspect of this is for academia and business together to push governments to change things. So we started, which this exclamation mark on my jacket here symbolizes, something called Research Sweden, which is built on an idea from Washington, as a matter of fact, called Research America. We collaborate with Research America in changing policies in government, not only for medical research as such, but also for the innovation aspects of things. Namely, how can companies, small or big, work with healthcare to find solutions to the problems we have. They might be high-tech, or they might be high-practice. Many of the most important solutions are not the fancy solutions. They're simply need to be done and can be done through, I would say, quite simple measures in a sense. So this, it might be so that the developing, the emerging economies might do this faster. We will have to buy the solutions from that part of the world, which is fine, I think. As long as the solutions come along, they must be used all across the board. And when it comes to the way we set up our university, I think this can be maybe thought about elsewhere as well, and we learn from other places too, of course. We of course have a TTO, Tech Transfer Office, which helps scientists, but we have a different setup. So what Zoltan was talking about, the Bioentrepreneurship in 1980, was interesting because the US moved from a situation where nobody knew who owned it, or Washington DC might have owned all the IP, the patents and so on, into the situation where the universities owned it. Sweden, already in 1949, started at the other extreme, namely the individual university scientists owned 100% of the intellectual property, and still that's the case. So that means that there's a strong incentive from our perspective for the individual scientists to take contact with anyone. It could be the local TTO, it could be a company in Germany or the US, or it could be a venture capitalist down the street. And this has created a very complex but interesting flow of intellectual property that we've studied recently by looking at the 15 years of all the patents that have come from individual scientists. Because we don't know anything at the university level, because we don't register, since we don't own anything as a university. And we see that a very small fraction goes to the TTO. The vast majority go into small and medium-sized enterprises of intellectual assets from scientists. And I think that's an interesting view compared to the US situation, where you have the Bioentrepreneurship, but it only works well, I believe, in a small fraction of all the universities. To really foster innovation in small companies, I think the small companies need to, as Jeff also stated, be in touch with both, in our case then, the healthcare system, or the universities, or larger companies. So what we try to bring to the table is to find ways of meeting places for small and medium-sized enterprises with university activities. So we start a lot of different networking activities, one called the Biotech Builders, where the leading, the CEOs and the leading people in healthcare, small and big companies, meet academia at an annual, very informal event. That's one example, and there are many other more professional events, but this is binding together the regional people that lead various activities. We do a lot of other things in our educational programs. So We started some 7 years ago a Master in Bioentrepreneurship, which is a master program in which people with a scientific, technical, or medical background enter a business program with the intention of becoming future entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs in companies. And to reach that goal, we bring in more than half of the teachers from industry. So it's very industry-oriented to basically provide the students with a cultural understanding of the business leaders, but also 40% of the time is spent embedded in companies or in key organizations that are not companies. They may be governmental agencies or the types of structures that influence the conditions for business. So we have students that have made placements, long placements at the FDA here in Washington, in an Indian company somewhere in India, look at the manufacturing capabilities or the reimbursement situation in Thailand, etc., etc. Students go anywhere in the world to learn about all the facets of what the business might be about. And I believe that's one route forward. Our students all are employed, or they start a company. So it's a really clear need we can sense or know already after this short while. We also try to look at how the innovation system really works. So we do a lot of research on the role of healthcare nowadays. Healthcare in Sweden used to be very open-minded. So if you go back 50 or 70 years, it was no problem for an engineer to be involved in identifying or finding solutions for problems that physicians, for example, could observe. In the last 20, 30 years, it's become more of a secluded type of activity where external organizations do not have as much access. And that's unfortunate because, in general, people in healthcare understand the problems well and a tentative need for a solution, but they may not get further than to a prototype. And we need to bring in my mind, engineers and other people, of course, behavioral scientists and so on, but people with that come from the consultancy world or companies that can, in a very organic fashion, work within healthcare. So, and this is starting to come up into the political level now that it's understood that we have closed off healthcare too much. We believe that healthcare can be an engine of innovation in many regards. So what I think universities need to do, apart from what I explained or described we have done in our place, is to understand the outside world much better. In a sense, the intelligence mapping activities of universities is haphazard, not very extensive sometimes. But more problematic maybe is that universities don't even know exactly what happens inside. So what the offer might be is not known. And if you will have an industry liaison office, some type of sign stating this is where you go when you want to work with us, and if this type of entity does not know much about the thousands of people working in there, that's a problem. So what we feel is the next level of change is to really map in more extensive fashion our thousands of researchers that work from molecule to population, from health promotion to chronic disease. We have groups working in every field. So does, of course, all other types of medical universities. And it's important that you have a savvy, very knowledgeable surface interaction with industry to be able to understand what you might be able to provide small and big companies with. When it comes to small enterprises or medium-sized enterprises, where I think the real potential lies, I think we've been pretty poor over time in really facilitating for them to see what we can help them with. There are good examples. For example, there's a filter company, a company with advanced filters for factories and for virus labs or for cars as well. But they don't do much user-oriented research. They mostly do technical research. But when it comes to seeing what impact this might have on health, for example, a medical university might be the right institution to help them. Because if they show that, for example, systemic inflammation in the body goes down if the air is cleaner through the filter, that's a sales argument which ramps up the price massively. So we do these types of interactions now, I think, which are good. Another example is not it's consultancy companies that work with healthcare organizations and to really change the way we deal with chronic disease. Chronic disease is costly, it's painful. Take the example of heart failure. Heart failure is a more and more common disease, as deadly as cancer, and it's largely due to hypertension that is increasing in the world. And the way that healthcare deals with this is very unprofessional. And just by bringing these savvy, computationally based consultants that work with the patient health records and do computations on risk and risk assessment by downloading all the patient data every night and basically identifying risk patterns, and as a consequence the nurse calls up the patient, or the nurse visits the patient, or the patient is called into the primary care setting. That has reduced unnecessary emergency room visits by 50% and reduced mortality massively. It's not high tech, but it's high thinking. And they've come to this level through interactions with universities. And there's a great room space for universities, hospitals, and small companies to work with. Thank you.